I very much enjoyed being vice president of Alive, because I was working with a president called Marcus, who was very, very into values. He was very into developing how we did things. And it was an interesting time working with him. And sadly, I think he was a great loss to us, because sadly he died. But it taught me really, when I was going around Europe and in different countries, teachers tend to hold the same things that they want to do with children when you ask them the question. And I found that it was quite useful to ask them the question I'm going to ask you, because often when we're talking about values, and when we may be trotting into school, standing in front of the classroom, wherever we're doing a presentation or a talk, I think we can make the assumption that everybody thinks the same. And I find it sometimes quite interesting. I don't know whether it's the English teacher, you always say define your terms before you start writing. I always like to know what people think values means, or what the word or the idea of values means to them. So that's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm just going to ask you to think about what values, how you define values, what they actually mean to you. And this is when you could put that slide up. What do we mean by values, Joanna? Because Joanna's carefully organised the technical side of things for me. And just think what you mean by it. And then when you've got your definition, put it into chat, everybody, or chat everyone. Just type it into chat everyone. And we can all see and share what we think. Do we think the same things? Do we have different takes? I would think it's a good starting point when you're meeting a group and you're talking to a group that you've not met before. It's that little minute of reflection to write down what your definitions, how you would define values. Means no right or wrong answer, really. Got one from Joanna. Energy. Oh, yes, I could do with some at the moment. Any more? You want to type them in? Yes, got one, a lovely one from Neil. Any more? Yes, way of living a fruitful life. That's a nice one. Yes, Sean, that's a very good one. Yes. I think when we look at those definitions that come up, they cover probably what most of us do actually think. It's about how we live and how we perhaps present ourselves to others. And do we do it with love, with joy, with energy? Do we do it with kindness? And the next slide, what are values, Joanna? Being an English teacher, I thought I'd show you the Oxford Dictionary definition. It's always good to have a dictionary definition for something. And then there's a couple of other definitions which really in some ways sum up what some of you have been putting down in the chat. What you're saying and what you're thinking. So the Oxford Dictionary has a value according is worth, desirability, utility, qualities on which these depend, as now learnt, saying something like the value of a friend. A belief, a mission, a philosophy meaningful to the company. And the one I think I like best is Julia Duckworth. She wrote a lovely book called The Little Book of Values. And she talks about values as being right at the heart of who we are driving what we do. And I think the last bit, and how we do it, is really so key. Because I think when we look at the year we've been through, there's a lot that's made us perhaps think about values in a different way, not necessarily as people who go in and talk about values and values education, but as people who are looking at society and how it's going. Because we've got probably the one time where everybody in the world is in the same situation. They're all actually fighting, trying to live with, trying to deal with this awful disease that's going around, this pandemic of COVID-19. And in different parts of the world, in different parts of our street and the country, we see people perhaps showing aspects of Julie's definition. It's not about the big grand gestures, but it's about people showing kindness, showing caring, and they're actually making a difference. And when I saw the heading in it, how values make a difference, I immediately thought about schools, because as Neil is quite able to tell you, when you go into a school that's value-based, that's got an ethos of caring, the difference in that school as to how the children are nurtured, how the staff are nurtured, is quite tangible. It can be seen and it can be recognised, and it can be a wonderful thing to be part of. But when we're in our streets, when we're walking around, going into the shops, masking up, trying to move out of people's way, keep our 2 meters distance and all the rest of it, we are really demonstrating values of caring, responsibility. And when you look at the first, if you look at the UK, the March lockdown, as they called it, the difference that made when people really thought about it and carried out everything they could do to keep people safe, shopping for each other, making sure a neighbour who was by herself or himself was okay, getting contact with streets, and maybe there hadn't been much contact before. It perhaps woke us up to realise we needed to make a difference to what was going on in our small locality. In our street, we put out a neighbourhood watch newsletter once a month to tell people what was going on. We got a WhatsApp group so that if people needed something, somebody else could provide it. It was very good on jigsaw exchanges and book exchanges and all that sort of thing. And you do get desperate, don't you, when you're in lockdown? I mean, we've even started playing chess, which I'm not sure is doing me much good at all. But it's looking at these things, how we model them. And when you look at also what went on in 2020, we had this horrendous incident in America and the Black Lives Matter protests in the middle of that pandemic, which probably didn't help the spread. Well, it probably did help the spread of the COVID in these countries. Democracy, we've just seen attacked. Human rights in all countries, really. Debates about who we should help, when we've got our own needs. It's a real test of our societies, isn't it? And it's a real test of our countries. We make lots of assumptions. If you go on to the assumptions we make, Joanna, we make lots of assumptions about our societies and about our way of life. We tend to think that society is going to flourish if we hold the same values. And we tend to talk about our values as a nation, our values as a country. This is what we are. This is who we are. And each country will have something that it holds on to as a kernel of what that country is and what it represents. And in some countries, the emphasis is very much on you work for the country. The individual isn't quite as important as the whole of the community. In other countries, individuality is very much prized. And it's interesting, in countries where the individual is not as important as the whole of the country, those countries seem to do quite well at containing the virus at the beginning because people were willing to do as they're told. There's a lovely cartoon I always remember seeing, and it's of fish swimming along in a school, and one fish is swimming in a different direction. And when they showed it to some people, I think there's a Japanese person, and he said, "Oh, that fish is swimming away from the group. Will it be all right?" And when they showed it to, say, someone in the UK, it was, "Oh, look, it's setting off to find its way in the world." There's different perception, a different assumption. And during the pandemic, we all had to perhaps think about our assumptions and look at the difference we would make as individuals. How would our values make a difference to us? And that, I think, was quite hard for people, because we were looking at our leaders telling us to do this, that, or the other because we needed to. And only when they modelled it themselves did it seem valid. We get a lot of press in our media about people not following the rules that they're setting out for others. And of course, that makes a big difference, doesn't it, to how we feel, maybe how we might behave. There are big questions, aren't there, about the mental health of people. Mm-hmm. How do we help people after this? There's going to be an endemic of, I suppose, post-traumatic stress. When you look at what some people on the front line in nursing, who are working in the ITU units, who are the police having to go out and walk into crowds knowing that somebody could give them virus, which they will take home to their family. The stresses and strains of all that. Now, that's where I suppose we can all make a difference, because if we actually do as we're asked and as we know we should do, that will make a difference for us. The lonely. I mean, there's been such great acts of kindness, haven't there, to people who've said they've been lonely, getting birthday cards from people who they don't even know, who've seen their plight. You've only got to look at perhaps the rush by all countries to develop these vaccines that are coming online now, and we're fortunate because we seem to be getting them. And then you come to the next big question: will our values as nations of the world mean that we make sure that everybody gets that vaccine who needs it? Or will the wealthy sort themselves out and then maybe sort out those who haven't got quite so much money or so much privilege or whatever, on the facilities even, to distribute these vaccines? There's quite a bit really in some ways that we have to think about. And again, maybe at the end you might have some thoughts from your own experience that you might want to put forward. But this is all based on values, isn't it? It's based on the values that we learn from our parents. We learn in good education where there's values taught or values modelled, more importantly, in what we do. And then how do we actually pass that on? How do we as individuals show it? And how do we as countries show it? If we go on to the next slide, Joanna, it's... as societies, of course, we do promote our values in different ways. And this was very interesting when I was asked by the African Women's Forum in Portsmouth to actually write them an education resource on Mandela's values. And I found that quite fascinating because I had read The Long Road to Freedom years ago and I revisited it. And when you look at his values, he has about 5. And I mean, they fit well in with living values, and they fit well in actually with being able to use British values as well, because when we did the Mandela Day, they learnt about the music, there was drumming, there was singing, there was dancing, and there was also meeting all the children in the different classes in the year and going through Mandela's values and showing how they could link to the British values that are in the education system, the English curriculum that have to be taught. And I suppose, as I've heard Neil say quite often, that values are modelled, they're caught, not taught. And I think that is becoming quite apparent, really, in some of the way people are responding to those who show values and those who don't. And when you look at it in English education, we talk about citizenships. We talk about an understanding of how citizens can influence decision-making in the legal processes. It reminds me of the citizenship that we used to do at school when we were learning in the sixth form about how government worked. So there's that aspect of it. And sometimes that can just be taught, and you have a lesson that's taught, but it doesn't actually give the pupils anything to carry out into the classroom, the next classroom they're going to always. And as you go down the list, there's a whole bullet point, a whole set of them. They've got to be taught tolerance of others' beliefs, race and religion. And when you look at what's been going on this year in this country and in others, it would seem to indicate perhaps we're not doing that as well as we could. Maybe we need to think a little bit more about how we promote the values we want our children to understand and to follow. An understanding of the freedom to choose and hold faiths and beliefs, an acceptance that other people have different beliefs and that they should be accepted and tolerated. There should be no prejudice. And one of Mandela's values was anti-racism, because he said nobody is born hating. We're taught that. And coming from an Irish background, you actually see a lot of that. People labelled by their religion, by their faith, and nothing to do with the values of Christianity, which is the tragedy, I think, sometimes of religious faiths that get very dogmatic or extreme. They forget what their origins were. And when we're looking at that ourselves as values educators, how can we do something about that? How can we ensure that really the difference we want to make and to show is going to get carried through? Because when they leave school, what are they going to do next time they see somebody racially abused, someone ignoring the care of someone else? The poverty that is there for children, so much has been shown up, hasn't it? About, we can talk the talk of values, but when we look at, even today in Parliament, the pictures of the food parcels, so-called hampers, that were being given out to children who are hungry, who need feeding. And the fact that somebody, if you like, an individual made a difference. Marcus Rashford is the obvious example, but in lots of communities, restaurant owners were actually using the food they couldn't sell, making up food and giving it out to people who needed it. And there were volunteers all over the place distributing it. There was so much going on, that perhaps wasn't shown because the media tend to show the negative and not always the positive. And those are things that I think we need to think about. If you look at slide 4, which is the Marcus Rashford one, Joanna, his life, he was a boy who grew up and his mother had to really work hard, several jobs, so that he would be fed and his brothers and sisters would be fed. Not alone in that. I remember my dad was a teacher, but he went out and did 3 other jobs because the salaries were so small so that we could be fed. And in a country like ours, which is supposed to be rich, it really is tragedy, really, I think, that it takes a 23-year-old to get the government to do what my former headmistress would have said was the right thing, to feed hungry children. He made a difference because he took on the responsibility of doing something, just as many others have done. And he has probably done more good, and people like him, because they're modelling their values, they're showing their values, they're influencing youngsters who see somebody who cares. They're examples of leadership. And the people that work with them have a positivity about them, because they hold the individual to be important. If you look at the development of behaviours in the environments that are supportive, that are caring, they generally benefit those who work in them. So in our work situations, in our school situations, wherever we are at the moment, those leaders, those teams that really care, they generate an ethos that modifies negative behaviours in the working environment. They can be really people can be supportive to each other. People working in it can really benefit from it. They enjoy going into work. Nobody should be afraid to go into work because they're going to be bullied or they're going to be treated unpleasantly, as if that was somehow the way it should be done. So that ethos that's generated in the working environment shows the integrity of the people who practice the values they promote. They don't necessarily talk about it, they just do it. And I think that is where, in many respects, we can make a difference. As individuals, as values educators, when we go into school, when we write our pieces that teachers can use, it's making sure that they can use them and see that they are sensible, that they will work. One of the things I found when I was doing the Mandela Day, because I was the one, you're the teacher, you can go and do the classroom stuff. So I had about 8 year 8 classes, one after the other. And I thoroughly enjoyed it because I went into a school called Park Community School. It's in a place in Portsmouth called Lee Park. And Lee Park is what you would call a deprived area. There's a great deal of poverty. There's a great deal of harsh living for children, for men and women. It's not all hunky-dory by any stretch of the imagination. And in that school, they're actually an Ubuntu school. They have Ubuntu stretched across their dining hall, and their ethos is that they're there for each other, to make life better for each other. And they do marvellous things. They don't get the most brilliant GCSE results all the time because they're starting quite often from a very low base. But they're giving those young people a belief in themselves. They're showing them that there are things they can do, all sorts of different things that school does to help those youngsters. And it has a project called Munch, and it feeds its families over the holidays, and it's been doing a project like that for quite some time. And it's a project that Rotarians that I'm involved with supported, which is how I know about it. But it's schools like that. When we're talking about values schools, they're not always ones that will have, the values up on the wall, as we like to encourage schools to do. But they will have something about their leadership, something about the way the teachers and the children work together as a learning community. And those schools make a difference to lives because they move children on. They give them a self-belief. They give them the opportunity to be better, to make the best of themselves. As I used to say to my year, to achieve their potential, which became a bit of a comment back, have you told your next year they've got to achieve their potential yet? But if they believe they can achieve their potential, they actually quite often do. So it's what your expectations, I think, are very important in that. Through Alive, it was very interesting because we were able to, in actual fact, put things out there through the books that people use for the resources that are there. But mainly, it's the trainers going in and talking to people and working with teachers. And the teachers they're working with realizing that they are the value. What they do makes that difference. It makes a difference in their classroom. It makes a difference in the staff room. It makes a difference in their life outside school. So in our societies, Values make a difference. It's not one that you can always scientifically tick a box and say, oh, we can see that. Oh, yes, that's so-and-so. But it does make a difference. And people's lives are affected. And I think Alive, Living Values UK, values-based education, there are all sorts of values groups that can help. And I sometimes think, really, should we be thinking about perhaps we can do a little bit more to work together? Perhaps we can sometimes think about, well, what is the path ahead for us? When you think about it, if you can put slide 5 up, which is the core assumptions one, that gives you something, you'll see what I've been talking about. But can we make sure that the universal values that we hold across all these groups of respect and dignity for each other can be promoted by all, can be shared by all, sharing resources, sharing our methodology, sharing the way we do things, because values education has a brilliant methodology for helping children express themselves and being able to understand what their values are. Can we make sure they thrive in a values-based atmosphere? That's so important. If you listen to Radio 4 on Today, if you're in the UK, it was very interesting. On the 31st of December, Bishop Rose Hudson-Wilkin, she was talking about Ubuntu and why it was so important, because it showed our responsibility to those around us. And I think people are hearing this word now, understanding far more what it actually means. It's values. It's the community caring for the individual and the individual caring back for his or her community. And Park Community School, as you can see up there, I've put the website address because I think you might find it quite interesting to look at them. They run a small holding for the children. They teach them how the basic skills, plastering and all these sort of things. But they do it with love, and they deal with their children and make their children feel valued. And when I was talking to those Year 8 kids, I said, well, what are the values you think? And the ones that most of them came up with, when you think of their backgrounds, was kindness. And one said, I'd just like it for people to smile at me. Because he was a little pain in the neck. You could, they come into the classroom and you could see, right, watch that one. Could be tricky. And yet he wanted really to be approved. He wanted approval. And good teachers will probably give him that. Groups like the African Women's Forum, they're promoting Mandela's values. It was quite interesting because we went to Winchester University and we met his, I think she was his granddaughter or grandniece, a member of the family. She took the book back with her because they're interested in his values being promoted, because when you think of his life, he actually modelled what he believed. As he said, he could have walked out of that prison with hate in his heart, and then he would have never left it. If you walk out and forgive and work with people and try and reconcile, then you make a difference. And South Africa is not a perfect country, but it's not been a bloodbath. And that's thanks to the attitude of a man who came out and tried to make that difference. I think through Alive, through our own work in our different countries and the different areas, there's a lot we could share and there's a lot we could do that are effective. Helen mentioned the Cyprus conference. The big mistake about the Cyprus conference was having it in July. Never have a conference in Cyprus in July because you melt. It is so hot. So I think we spent all our time drinking water and sitting by the pool when we weren't very busy doing our conference thing, if you like. But very few of us went to walk along the front because, it was murder. Perhaps that's just me. It was very, very hot. But it was wonderful seeing from people from Eastern Europe, Poland, from the Jordan, because they came from Jordan, from different countries around Europe, talking about what they were doing. People from very different cultures, societies with, in theory, different values, because if you think about Poland, it had been communist until fairly recently, so a lot of things in that country were being changed. But the teachers themselves wanted their children to have something that would give them the opportunity to be better than they could be, if you like, and to understand it's not bad to be kind. You can do all these things. And the lessons that they were doing with the children in dance and in music to demonstrate values and to get values into their heads were absolutely amazing. It was a wonderful visit. And the university students were quite interesting because I went into Poznan University to do this, I forget what the title of the presentation was now, and I had a lovely translator called Annetta, and I think we became quite a double act by the end of the visit. And there were philosophy and education students. And I did what I did with you. I asked them to tell me what they thought values meant. And we had a very interactive session, and I noticed the adults, if you like, the older adults sitting at the side and taking notes, and that always unhinges me a bit because I think, why are they doing that? And in actual fact, they do what I would call chalk and talk. They stand in front, a bit like in Scandinavia, they deliver their lecture, that's it, and then everybody goes. And they were seeing, if you like, a lecture where students were participating, and they were watching how the students were participating. And it's quite interesting to go into that situation and do it, if you like, in the way we usually do it, and have their teachers seeing something that they could possibly do that would actually perhaps make their lectures more enjoyable. I don't know, but it's very interesting working with those students. They were very bright, and you just hope that they've been able to take something on into education from that they've got the idea. Phil Clothier is known to us in values, isn't he? And he's on LinkedIn. Go on LinkedIn, you'll see some of the things he posts. And there are lots of things that we can do that make values work in our societies. But it's just not making assumptions. It's remembering that we are always value, and we have to live it ourselves. And I think if we are looking forward, it's looking at how can we do more of this with maybe different groups. You know, we've got healthcare, we've got our local community groups working with young people, we've got businesses looking to have values, and they talk about values, and we all know there are all sorts of places that talk about values, have their big thing on as you go in, this is our way of doing things. And then you get the staff telling you, it's not. They don't actually do it. It's up there to tick a box. It's not there to be actually lived. And that's where perhaps as values educators, as living values education, we should think about how we can broaden our base, because there are going to be a lot of people as this pandemic progresses, as the vaccines go out and as life starts to change, that are going to need support, that are going to perhaps need help, that values educators might be able to offer in humility and maybe do something that would make a difference. And I think that's the important things when we're thinking about, do values make a difference? Yes, they do. Individuals who have values make a difference, and values groups can make an impact by modeling what they do, sharing what they do, and pulling others in to be aware of what they do. And I think that's something perhaps